Next is Kevlin Henney.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the talk itself. And so the reason that there is a slide here showing the Niagara Falls is I want to talk about controlling your flow. And this whole idea of controlling your flow actually will influence the very structure and the content of your talk. And you've got to kind of look at the talk as being, as it were, a journey or a river. And this idea is particularly helpful if you are nervous or if you have a lot to get through. This applies to if you're doing a 5-minute talk or you find yourself doing a half-day session. Having this kind of idea is a kind of fundamental idea. And we would like it to be less than turbulent, as we've got in this particular slide. So my name's Kevlin Henney. You can find me all over the place, especially since the fragmentation of social media. I'm an independent consultant based in the UK. I do a lot of training and workshops and bits of coding and bits of writing. I do a lot of talks, and you can actually find me in a number of different places online, to the point that there are pictures of me doing talks. But I want to start off with one aspect that I think for a lot of people is particularly concerning, and picking a very nice little quote here from Richard O. Smith, and this is going to be universally true, not specific to the UK, but this is cited in that context. Year after year in the UK, glossophobia claims a top spot as Britain's #1 phobia, repeatedly knocking fear of death down into second position. Glossophobia is the fear of speaking. In other words, at a funeral, the average Briton would rather be in the casket than deliver the eulogy. And this is going to cramp a lot of people's style. This is, if you are nervous, and you have every right to be nervous getting up on stage or just projecting your screen, and with an awareness that there is an audience out there. There is this, so basically you want to have everything as clear in your mind as possible. And there are a number of different things that are going to help you with this. But the first thing to realize is to borrow from the wisdom of the Stoics. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. But the other thing is always be very cautious. What you need to look out for is the techniques and tips that lots of people will offer, myself and the other speakers this evening. Do not take these necessarily as rules, although there is one rule I always pass on to people when they start out. If you're showing code, use a bigger font. And they say, how big? I don't know. Whatever you're thinking, make it bigger. That always seems to be a constant piece of advice. But pretty much for everything else, you need to think about it as what we're offering is a set of tools. You need to find the ones that work for you. These are not guidelines that are mandates. These are not rules. To quote Monty Python, you are all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals. You're all different. Yes, we're all different. I'm not. You're that person. You are the person who is the outlier. And so part of the trick to giving a talk and finding your flow, and let me be very clear, when I say you want to find your flow, the flow is that feeling where you kind of stop thinking about the fact that you're giving a talk. You get into your topic, and that's where you want to be. What are the tricks you need to do to get to that place? Now, there's a number of different things. So I will acknowledge the differences in terms of how people work with this. And you need to work out who you are. Some people like to script out everything. Okay. So one of the most interesting things you can do is if you're at a conference or in a situation where you have a number of people who have differing levels of experience, they don't need look for people with different experience. When you are in that situation, ask questions of them, and you find out what kind of person they are. You will find some people like to script their talk out. Other people like to prepare and work with high-level notes. Other people like to let the talk emerge organically as they're putting the slides together, but also in their delivery. Okay, they kind of let it happen. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to do that, how you can do that. So you've got to figure out which one you are. There are many options. So it's almost like you're looking for a good fit. What is the kind of speaker that you are? And obviously, when you're starting out, you don't necessarily know, but there are some things that will probably inspire more fear within you than not. And if the idea of practicing something makes sense to you, then do it. Because you might say, but I don't know if it's going to make any difference. It's going to make a difference because you just said it would. If you say that feels like a good idea, go with it. Okay, that's going to help you find your flow. You need to establish the bigger picture, the goal, the narrative. So you've got information, you've found your passion, whatever it is that you're going to talk about. There's a message there. There should be a point. You also have a timeline. But a way of thinking about it is also to recognize that it is a story. Okay, there is a story to be told. You remember stories, either you tell them to your kids or you remember having stories told to you. A story has a kind of logical structure that fits together. That helps you find your flow. Once you're in that flow, it becomes easier. If your story is not really a story, but a disjoint set of pieces, and you feel that you're throwing them together, hoping that something's going to come out, maybe something will, but maybe something won't. You need to find that thread that is going to work through them. It is a journey. You're taking people from one place to another. Simultaneously, it is a place. People are spending their time. It's a store. You're hoping to offer goods to them. And that other aspect to appreciate, that a talk is indeed very much like a TARDIS. It is bigger on the inside. And that becomes a kind of a sort of principal consideration. So let's talk about talk structure for a moment. Is your talk a tree? What do I mean by a tree? If your talk is a tree, I mean that it's hierarchical. That's how you've thought about it. And in your head, you probably have sections and you have a hierarchical structuring. You're a developer. This is incredibly natural to you. The danger is, though, you can end up with a very full tree. You can end up with so many points that you have to cover absolutely all of them. And you are compelled to cover them. Now, if it turns out that you're short of time, if you actually have an abundance of time, that's great. People find that their ability to land the talk at the right length is unpredictable. This is sometimes why practice helps, but sometimes people find that they practice at a different pace to their colleagues or at a mirror. If your talk is a tree, I'm going to suggest that you don't necessarily present it as such. It is very tempting, unless you are kind of running a half day or a full day kind of session, where you have a lot more luxury of time, but also the confidence of people in the room. If you're doing something shorter, you don't necessarily have that kind of communication. So what I mean by presenting as a tree and being very careful with this is you can end up killing people with bullets. Okay. Those are a natural hierarchical translation. You're thinking, oh, this is org mode. This is how I think. And sure, but that's not necessarily what you want to present. How you take people through those has to feel like a timeline, not a tree, not a hierarchy. Don't overcommit yourself. Don't show too much of the tree up front. If you have one of the worst things you can end up doing is saying, I have 7 sections, and suddenly you run out of time and you only have 5 sections that you've got through. As a general point, I would also advise against, and I am keenly aware that I violate this guideline on a frequent basis, and I often regret doing so. Don't put numbers in the title of your talk. And what do I mean by that? Don't say, here are 10 tips. If you can possibly avoid it, particularly if you are starting out. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because you can't manage your time, and therefore you cannot manage your pace. You cannot adjust your pace accordingly or easily. If you've got a 40-minute talk and you're at minute, and you've said, I'm going to cover 10 items, that's 4 items per 4 minutes per item. You need to understand your own velocity. You need to understand your slide velocity and your item velocity. And you may find that there are points of particular interest, and you realize there you are, minute 35, and you have covered 5 out of 10. That now leaves you with 1 minute per item. You're not going to do that, and you're going to shortchange the audience. So hard-coded literals, do try and avoid them. When you're dealing with the tree, try and figure it at a high level. And I know that sometimes people like to have a kind of journey. And the journey idea is, I will show you, I'm going to cover, here are 5 topics. Perhaps you haven't put those in the title. Well done. But here's the structure of my talk, and I show you that, and I will let you know where we are in that. And basically, you're telling people it's a journey. It's a destination. We've got a journey that we're going to go through, and I'm going to visit different destinations. I think that's a great metaphor, but be very careful with that structure if you're not confident on the timing and the pace. Because the thing I always tell people is you need to plan to leave something out. The question you need to ask yourself is, what is it that I can drop if I run out of time? If I'm pushed for time, what can I drop? Similarly, if I am ahead of time, what can I spend more time on? So in essence, take people on a journey, but build it. Don't give them the whole map up front, except in a very abstract way. Here's what I'm going to talk about. You don't have to give them section structures and show them. You can have section markers, but the idea that you can miss out a section should be easy. What are the sections you can miss out on? So this kind of leads us into the idea of what we're going to think of in terms of pacing and time. Where does the time matter? What is the kind of time you need to be aware of? Topic time, slide velocity. Now, this is something that I stumbled across very early on in my speaking career, is work out, particularly for longer talks. It's a little harder sometimes with lightning talks, and it's a little less relevant with workshops, because then it's actually about much more the material as opposed to the slides. It's less about the talk in that sense. But the idea of what is your typical slide velocity, I can't tell you what that is. I found that years ago with bulleted slides, I had roughly one slide every 3 minutes. These days, my slide velocity is typically about 1 a minute or faster, because I now put few points. I tend not to use bullets as a rule. And the idea is, understand what your typical velocity is. If you've given a talk before, understand the bits where you slow down. The things that can actually mess with your pace are some slightly curious things. One of them is a demo. If you do demos, honestly, I'd always suggest to people, try and avoid doing demos. People often say in show business, never work with children or animals. I would extend that a step further. Try not to do live demos unless you've got luxury of time. In other words, you're doing a workshop and you've got plenty of time, you have everybody's patience. But if you're confined to something like 45 minutes, an hour or whatever, that is going to be problematic. Particularly, you might think you're typing really fast. Somebody in the audience is not going to see that. They're going to see you typing. Typing is still typing. It's not interesting. To do it well, you also have to be talking over it. You actually need to be producing code about 50% to 100% faster than you actually are if you're a fast typist. The other problem we also have is things like auto-completion, which actually, when you are doing that, is massively distracting. So this is a contradiction in one sense. We say, well, this is really helpful. I'm watching you do that. That's messing with my interpretation. You're messing with the reader's flow or the watcher's flow. So be very, very careful with that. These tools that normally help us and we normally think we're doing fine with, be careful. Use pre-prepared examples if you, where possible. Do fragments of demo if you really feel the need for a demo, but have different starting points. Don't need to connect the starting points. Have pre-prepared things ready to show people that require absolutely minimal additional development. Alternatively, do all this in advance. Either record yourself and speed it up to the appropriate speed, and therefore you're narrating and you have all the time and the confidence. You're not stressing yourself with that. Alternatively, take the code, put it on the slides, and there you get to direct people's attention. You're not showing them your IDE, which is honestly, it's however you set up your IDE, I'm sure you've done a wonderful job. It's a mess. If you're presenting it, it's a mess. It's not, what presents well is not the same as what we experience in the audience. So these are things that are going to mess with your time, your perception of time, but also other people's perception of time. And they can also go wrong. Network demos or anything relying on anything on the net, on the internet, is reliably going to go wrong at some point. So you want to be in control of all of the elements of your talk. That is going to give you some kind of confidence and some kind of pace. So that brings us kind of to a couple of closing comments. This is the kind of flow we want to avoid. In addition to helping you with understand your own flow, the other piece of advice, this is the flow that you actually want. The other piece of advice I would offer you on this one is when you are presenting, do not just present your screen. Set up where possible, use a presenter view. The presenter view gives you complete control. You're sharing a second screen. You're projecting to a second screen. This works from home or when you are live in person somewhere. It allows you to control your time. Normally there is a clock in the presenter view. Make sure in addition that you have clocks around you so you can navigate your pace. So a phone is obviously a very good example. If you're in your own place, you know where to look. If you are in a public place, if you're in a speaking, some kind of conference, check out in advance whether or not they've got clocks. If they don't, make sure that you put your one nearby so you can see it. But the other thing with the presenter view is it also allows you to navigate and skip through your talk. It allows you to skip slides and nobody knows. So there's that idea of you've created a journey. Maybe there are 10 parts to your journey and you've already identified 2 or 3 of them as potentially optional. You might skip them if you have time. Nobody knows that you're slipping past that in order to do time. But should you realize you have more time, you can go back to them, which is just another minor point on slide construction. Never number your slides, because people can then see when you're doing that. The point is you're offering people a journey. You're offering them an experience. Their flow is just as important as your flow. So on that, I will wrap up with a wonderful piece of advice from the Queens of the Stone Age. Go with the flow.
That is a very good advice.